The story begins with a young orphan girl who has been completely on her own since being abandoned by her relatives at just 12 years old. She had struggled to survive in extreme hardship since childhood, which made her position as a housemaid the most cherished job she ever had. But when her male employer began relentlessly harassing her, it was she who was ruthlessly cast out onto the streets by the lady of the house, left completely alone with nowhere to call home. After wandering the streets for an entire day, she used her very last coins to buy a small piece of bread. Just as she was about to devour it, a homeless mother and daughter shuffled past. The little girl stared longingly at the food, and despite starving herself, the kind-hearted woman handed the bread over to the child. Her real name was Neely. Almost unconsciously, her footsteps guided her back to a familiar, dark street where desperate women lined the pavements. An old acquaintance called out to her, and facing a man with clearly sinister intentions, and with absolutely no idea how she would afford tomorrow's meals, Neely allowed herself to be pulled into a secluded corner. In a world gripped by harsh economic depression, this punishing life was the only way she could keep herself fed. Neely wandered through the night, repeatedly reading a book she had carried with her for over a decade, hoping the text would bring some peace to her soul. But even among the homeless, survival was a cutthroat game. An elderly woman claimed Neely had stolen her sleeping spot, cursing loudly and shoving her away. When Neely refused to move, the old woman roughly attacked her, snatching her treasured book and throwing it into the dirt. This bitter struggle caught the eye of a passing Red Cross worker. He approached Neely and asked if she knew how to read. When she confidently replied that she could, the worker offered her a job as a frontline battlefield logistics support worker. Just like that, her life shifted. She began marching into the hills directly after fierce, violent battles, searching through the wreckage for wounded or fallen soldiers. Though the gruesome work was exhausting for her small, thin frame, Neely clenched her teeth and pushed forward. Returning to camp without a single moment to catch her breath, she immediately hurried to the kitchen to light the fires and cook meals. Yet, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Here, she finally had warm food, a shelter from the elements, and safety. One evening, after a punishing shift, Neely pushed open the door to her quarters, only to find a soldier behaving inappropriately toward a frightened young woman. Neely aggressively scolded the soldier and shoved him out into the corridor. The traumatized woman explained that she and her father had just escaped a violent, bloody riot. Her father had lost his life in the chaos, and the Red Cross had taken her in. Comforted by Neely's kindness, the young woman held nothing back, revealing her true identity. Her name was Amelie. Before passing away, her father told her he had a wealthy, high-society friend living in Bordeaux. Amelie planned to rest for a few days before using her father's official letter of recommendation to seek their protection, showing Neely a precious family keepsake her father had left behind. Compared to Neely, who had no one, Amelie was incredibly fortunate to have been loved. Suddenly, a massive bomb detonated right outside the window. Neely quickly guided Amelie down into the air raid shelter before rushing back to the surface to treat the wounded. Seconds later, a devastating second wave of attacks struck the camp. When Neely finally scrambled back down into the shelter, she found Amelie lying motionless on the ground, suffering from a clearly fatal wound. Right beside the dying girl lay the golden ticket, the letter of recommendation. Neely opened it, and a bold, desperate idea took root in her mind. Stripping out of her blood-stained work clothes, she decided to make the real heiress disappear from the world forever. She tore the signature necklace from Amelie's neck and hurled it straight into the burning stove. Just then, the voices of approaching enemy soldiers echoed down the hall. Panicking, Neely reached into the open flames to snatch the necklace back, burning a permanent, raw scar into the palm of her hand. When the enemy soldiers burst through the door, Neely cleverly claimed she was a neutral Swiss citizen, pointing to the lifeless body on the cot and stating that the dead woman was the French nurse, Amelie. Her quick thinking saved her life. Once the enemy occupied the camp, they promised her a travel pass to leave the war zone. When the officer asked for her name, she looked him dead in the eye and lied, "My name is Amelie." 2 weeks later, Neely arrived at the luxurious estate of Madame Eleanor in Bordeaux. Upon reading the heartfelt letter written by her late, dear friend, Madame Eleanor embraced the girl with zero doubts about her identity. Lonely and longing for companionship, the wealthy woman asked Neely to read a passage from a novel. Neely's deeply emotional reading, shaped by a lifetime of surviving the world's cruelest hardships, moved Madame Eleanor to tears. Neely knew exactly how to play the part. She thoughtfully adjusted a silk scarf that had slipped from the older woman's shoulders, cementing Madame Eleanor's deep affection for her. Overnight, Neely's life underwent a breathtaking transformation. She went from a starving street servant to a respected, elegant young lady, showered with luxury, care, and invitations to exclusive high society galas. Madame Eleanor had a handsome nephew named Julian. During his frequent visits, he found himself captivated by Neely's calm demeanor and sharp philosophical insights. One afternoon, while passionately discussing literature, Julian impulsively reached out and held her hand. The moment Neely realized he was staring directly at the mysterious burn scar on her palm, she pulled away in a panic and quickly slipped her gloves back on, terrified her cover would be blown. Julian remained suspicious, later questioning Neely about her childhood growing up in Switzerland. But Neely kept her composure. The night before, she had memorized a geography book about Switzerland from the estate's private library, using those facts to narrowly answer his questions. Later, while gathering wild vegetables in the countryside, Neely casually named several rare plants. Madame Eleanor was puzzled, knowing a sheltered wealthy lady like Amelie should never possess such common knowledge. Neely quickly spun a lie, claiming she had learned about nature from a village peasant girl. To completely erase the doubt, Neely distracted her by performing a lively Swiss folk dance she'd read about, spinning the elegant older woman across the grass while the head housekeeper watched in absolute disbelief. But Neely's past still haunted her. One evening, she witnessed Madame Eleanor ruthlessly scolding and firing a young maid who had become pregnant. Neely realized that high society elites could never truly empathize with poor workers clinging to survival. That night, Neely secretly met the weeping maid in the dark, handing her the address of the kind Red Cross worker, hoping it would save her from the streets. Seeing the maid cast out made Neely realize her beautiful new life was a fragile dream built on a lie. 3 months later, the dream fractured into a living nightmare. During a grand family gathering, Madame Eleanor formally introduced Neely to her elite inner circle, declaring her as a true daughter of the family. But as Neely was reading aloud to the guests, a mysterious, pale figure slowly emerged from the shadows. Neely locked eyes with the woman and fainted dead away in absolute shock. The real Amelie, whom Neely thought had died in the trenches 6 months ago, had miraculously survived and tracked her down. When Neely woke up in her bedroom, she assumed her deception was finished and tried to slip out into the night. But Madame Eleanor was standing guard outside the door, deeply worried about her health, and urged her to go back to bed and rest. Downstairs in the dining room, the real Amelie confronted Madame Eleanor, desperately screaming her true identity. But Madame Eleanor completely refused to believe the disheveled stranger and had her thrown off the property that very night. Julian, however, sensed a dark mystery unfolding. He secretly intercepted the real Amelie and arranged for her to stay safely at a local church. He then rushed back to the estate, begging his aunt to let him investigate the matter before making a permanent mistake. Listening from behind the door, Neely overheard everything. At dawn, Neely hurried to the church to confront the real Amelie. She offered a sincere, weeping apology, explaining she genuinely believed Amelie had died in the blast. She begged her to understand that Madame Eleanor loved her now, and she couldn't bear to break the old woman's heart. Neely shoved an envelope packed with all her pocket money into Amelie's hands, promising a massive monthly allowance if she would just walk away and let her keep the identity. But Amelie wanted her life back, not charity. Furious, she shouted that she was taking back everything that belonged to her, grabbing a sharp piece of silverware and hurling it directly at Neely's face. Neely fled the church, clutching her bleeding cheek. Back at the estate, she realized the slash was only a minor scratch. Looking into the mirror, a dark, manipulative plan formed in her mind. Neely picked up a straight razor and deliberately sliced deeper into her own flesh, turning the scratch into a horrific wound. She then dragged the police chief to the estate, lying that the crazed stranger had stalked and brutally assaulted her. She claimed the woman was dangerously mentally unstable and had likely escaped from an asylum. Backed by Madame Eleanor's immense high society influence, the police chief complied immediately, arresting the completely blindsided Amelie and locking her away in a high-security asylum. To comfort her traumatized daughter, Madame Eleanor presented Neely with a priceless heirloom brooch passed down through generations. Looking at the stunning piece of jewelry, Neely felt a crushing wave of shame. The unconditional trust of this beautiful woman was becoming a suffocating weight. Days later, Neely intercepted a secret letter from Julian, who had been missing for a week. Her heart raced as she read the text. Julian had traveled directly to the war zone to track down the Red Cross worker who had hired Neely. The truth was coming, and Julian was already en route to Paris to confirm his suspicions. While Madame Eleanor excitedly planned a lavish seaside vacation to help Neely recover, Neely felt absolute terror. She knew the moment Julian returned, she would be stripped of her silk dresses and thrown back into the gutter. Returning from a tense walk in the garden, Neely found Madame Eleanor suffocating and collapsed on the sofa. Utilizing her swift battlefield training from the Red Cross, Neely grabbed a fruit knife and expertly sliced a vein in Madame Eleanor's arm, performing an emergency medical bloodletting treatment that saved her life. When the head housekeeper walked in and saw the procedure, his eyes widened in shock. A fragile, wealthy high society lady would never possess the cold, precise medical skills of a frontline battlefield nurse. A week later, Julian abruptly cancelled his Paris trip to tend to his sick aunt, returning to the estate. Neely forced herself to remain calm, quietly working in the garden as he approached. Julian invited her into the quiet forest, begging her to simply tell him the truth herself, but Neely chose absolute silence. She just wanted to experience this beautiful paradise for one more day. But the clock had run out. The real Amelie had broken out of the mental asylum and breached the estate grounds under the cover of darkness. While Neely was reading to Madame Eleanor, the agonizing weight of her lies broke her, and she burst into tears mid-sentence. That very night, Amelie crept into the dark kitchen, filled a heavy bucket with boiling water, and carried it up the stairs to Neely's bedroom to disfigure her impostor. Neely detected the shadow just in time, diving out of the way as the scalding water splashed across the floor. Hearing the screams, Madame Eleanor rushed in and held a shaking Neely tightly in her arms, ordering the entire staff to weaponize and guard the estate. Seeing the pure, fierce love Madame Eleanor had for her, Neely broke. She could no longer live a lie. At the break of dawn, she packed a single bag to slip away forever so Amelie could reclaim her rightful place. But as she reached the grand staircase, Julian blocked her path, while the housekeeper dragged a bound Amelie into the hall. Madame Eleanor furiously demanded the police take the intruder away. Watching Amelie scream and struggle, Neely saw her own tragic past flashing before her eyes, the nightmare of being hunted, poor, and utterly abandoned. Stepping forward, Neely confessed everything, shouting her real identity to the entire room. With the mystery solved, Neely quietly walked out of the estate gates and out of their lives forever. Up in her room, Madame Eleanor buried her face in her hands and wept bitterly. She had been deceived, yet she realized she couldn't stop loving the girl who had brought light back into her lonely world. Gathering her composure, Madame Eleanor called the real Amelie into her study. She told her coldly that Neely would always hold the place of a true daughter in her heart, having saved her life and healed her soul. Madame Eleanor then drew up her final will and testament. She legally established a permanent, comfortable estate for Amelie, and provided her with a massive inheritance to ensure she would live in luxury for the rest of her days. Satisfied with the wealth, Amelie took her money and left the estate without a backward glance. The next day, Neely stood at the Bordeaux docks, purchasing a single ship ticket back to Paris. For a woman born at the very bottom of a cruel society, forced to fight the crushing weights of social class and sheer survival, the lines between good and evil didn't exist. Her journey had been tragic, but in the end, she had discovered what it truly felt like to be loved. If this intense, suspenseful psychological historical drama about stolen identities, high society secrets, and the desperate battle for survival kept you completely hooked, make sure to smash that subscribe button right now. Don't forget to hit the notification bell, drop a like on this video, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on Neely's daring choice. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the very next video, right here on Cinemaned.